So, DragonShard. First thing I can say about this game, it's well presented and has undoubtedly the coolest installation screen I have ever seen. I mean, look at it. The whirling and the turning and the steampunk, it's freaking amazing. How many developers actually put time and effort into their installation screens? I don't know of any that have put this much effort in. This thought and attention to detail continues from the installation onwards. All the menus and UI elements have an element of Warforged or steampunk to them, Warforged being D&D's version of steampunk. When installing and navigating a game's menu is enjoyable, you've got to think Atari and Liquid Entertainment have done something right. So, we're off to a good start. Let's look at some gameplay elements. This game has many similarities with other titles in the RTS RPG hybrid genre, notably Spellforce and Warcraft, the RTS that is, not the game that shan't be named. DragonShard beats Spellforce hands down to the post. I couldn't bring myself to review Spellforce. I had such high hopes for that game while installing it, only for them to be dashed after discovering how slow and unrefined it was. D&D DragonShard is infinitely more polished. Spellforce's troops take an age to construct, even after spending half the game setting up resource lines. They just seem like damage hoses. Point them at an enemy and let them sprinkle them to death. It's just so boring, and it's a shame because it's a waste of so much potential. DragonShard, on the other hand, forces you to command your units as a coherent group, moving squishier classes away from danger, healing with clerics, while keeping barbarian buffs up and using your hero abilities to good effect. Make no mistake, this isn't StarCraft. You won't be constantly kiting mobs and popping stim packs, but combat is certainly not dull, and there is always cooldowns to keep an eye on, and more efficient or safer places for your units to be. While on the subject of units, the pathfinding in this game is actually pretty good. Pathfinding is a problem that often plagues mid to low budget RTS games, and when done badly can make a mediocre game downright frustrating. Having said that, the maps are fairly linear and path based to start with, although smart map design often allows multiple directions of approach and you never feel herded down a particular path. In the same way, you never feel forced to take a fixed army composition. Each race has a choice of 11 units. These units are unique in their own way and each has a place in your army, but of course, you can't pick them all at once. Each unit has powers that can turn the tide of battle if used correctly, and helpfully, powers such as the Cleric's Heal ability can be set to auto-cast, healing the most damaged unit in a small radius, while the Ranger's ability to place caltrops can damage approaching enemies or help a hasty retreat. These are just a few examples of the powers. There are many more, and units at least have 2 each. The one exception to the variable army composition is the Rogue. Sure, you can try and clear the dungeon without them, but you'll get poisoned, squashed and mincemeated, yes that is a real verb, into oblivion, all while missing all the treasure because you can't pick doors and chests. This brings me neatly to DragonShard's addition to the RTS genre. This is the inclusion of dungeons, not as an underground base map, but as a second layer within each campaign level, accessible via points on the overworld. In the dungeon, you collect most of your gold and XP for purchasing and upgrading units respectively. You also disarm traps, complete quests and find 1 use buff items, all of which bolsters your above ground troops and champion. I think Atari really missed a trick here. Your troops can move freely between dungeon and overworld, but the AI troops cannot. If they could, it would lead to some interesting tactics and require keeping a watchful eye on the dungeon to prevent surprise attacks. If further developed, it could also lead to a deeper, more complex game, whereby you manage troops above and below ground simultaneously. But as it stands, there is little pressure to do so. The AI troops rarely push into your base, except during scripted moments, and this allows you to leisurely explore the dungeon at your own pace. Having said that, if you were too busy flitting between the 2 maps, you'd be liable to miss treasure and secrets, and the well-designed dungeon encounters often require a lot of micromanagement. This probably wouldn't be possible if you were having to focus on 2 maps at once. Dungeons are a great addition to the game. Now I feel they are slightly underdeveloped, but their inclusion is great. It makes it a lot more enjoyable and a lot more unique. So now we've looked at dungeons, we're going to take a bit of a more in-depth look at base building. After the first couple of missions, when you've unlocked a few more troop types, you are given a full-size town to manage. Each town has approximately 16 plots that you can build on. You must carefully choose the composition of your town. Building unit barracks the same type next to each other allows you to further upgrade these troops. But of course, you cannot upgrade all of your troops to level 5 without downsizing on your army's utility. In addition, you can build monuments, which take place of a barrack, but provide each unit produced while next to it with a significant and permanent buff. All of this comes together to provide the player with tactical choices of how to raise an army. Do you build many variable types of unit and buff them with monuments? Or focus on levelling up a few troop types and only build singular barracks of other units to flesh out your force? Both have merits, and I'll let you decide which is best for your playstyle. As you can see, DragonShard takes a welcome detour and change of pace, from setting up resource lines, teching up, and finally steamrolling over your opponent, which is a sequence of events often found in the RTS genre. If you're a veteran RTS player, you may feel this game is lacking strategic building placement, expansions, and managing efficient resource lines. And you might be right, but doing away with all that allows you to get stuck in much faster. And in many ways, this could have been a cookie cutter RTS, the D&D label haphazardly stuck to it. But I respect the choice of Atari to do away with all that and create something original and engaging. I would move on to discuss the RPG elements of DragonShard, but frankly there aren't many. The experience you collect and levels your troops gain do not carry over from mission to mission, and the champions themselves do not level up. However, two things are persistent throughout the campaign. Firstly, the items you find and buy from the store at the end of the mission, which fall into two categories: buff items and one-use potions. And secondly, the units you acquire while playing. Often, you have no choice but to bump into new unit types who inevitably join your cause. Some units though have to be found, or in the case of the Warforged, essentially mobile wrecking balls, constructed from parts strewn across the level. Interestingly, these side quests to gather more units can be missed, and go some way to add the feeling of progression often found in RPGs. DragonShard is hard to recommend as an RPG, because it sucks at that. It also sucks at what would be traditionally seen as an RTS. So why am I reviewing this game? There are many examples of individual elements of DragonShard being done with much more finesse in other titles, both in the RTS and RPG genre. But there's something about the way DragonShard brings these elements together that is very special. The feeling of hand-picking and constructing troops, advancing them in levels, crawling through a dungeon, and then emerging in the light to take down the enemy walls is unique to DragonShard, and it's worth playing just for that. For its release in 2005, DragonShard actually looks pretty good. A lot of time has been spent making the environments you adventure in look and feel great. And bear in mind that I'm on a crappy laptop, with most settings turned off or reduced. It looks much better on a computer with a dedicated graphics card, unlike my laptop, which is shit. DragonShard isn't your next big RPG fixation, or your new RTS to obsess about. You won't be poring over skill lists or discussing the perfect abilities for your character to have, nor will you be creating build orders and hard counters in your imagination while driving the car or on the train. But DragonShard is the kid at school who everyone bullied because he dared to be different. But now he has a great job, a car with an engine the size of a house, and he looks down on you over his cosmetically enhanced nose. It's only £6.15 on GOG.com, and is only a relatively small download with very little hardware requirements. What excuse have you got not to try it? At least if you don't like it, you can look back in 10 years and say, I tried talking to that weird kid in school, but I still think he's a dick.